Hey guys, so I wanted to make a video on how to basically view yourself, right? And I think this is very important because we're going to have all these different sensations and thoughts and emotions that come up. And it's important to realize that a lot of these things are not actually you, and like they are, they come from you technically, right? But they're not always an accurate representation of reality and of what you should do. So we need to be aware of these and understand that, just because these things come up does not mean you need to act upon them, right? So the way I see it, we basically want to view ourselves in these three main areas. So we have our ego, which is basically just the way we see the world. And a lot of this is influenced from our trauma and social conditioning, right? So it's important to be aware of like what kind of thoughts and emotions are coming from our ego and our self-image, right? And it's important to realize, which part of that is our trauma or what part of that is just, our social conditioning, right? Because we need to understand that these things aren't necessarily us, right? Our trauma and the social conditioning are things that happened to us that influenced how we see things, right? So it's not something that you actually like manufactured yourself. So the next one, we have our biological drives, right? And I think this is actually a big problem for men when it comes to dating sometimes. A lot of the times they'll let their biological drive of, needing to have sex just take over way too much, and they'll get way too sexual and they'll come off as creepy or whatever. And, it can create a lot of problems in relationships because they basically just don't have any control over that biological drive. And, they're basically just a slave to it, and it creates a lot of problems, right? So that's another thing to be aware of is, being horny, also things like being thirsty, hungry. And sometimes you do need to act upon these biological drives, right? Like sometimes you do need to act upon, being thirsty or hungry because maybe you actually are hungry and you actually do need that, right? And then we have our true self, which is basically our higher self, and this part of us is basically our own true thoughts, our own true opinions that actually come from within us and not from these other sources, right? So as much as we'd like to be our true selves all the time, we do need to recognize that these other parts will come up, and it's up to us to choose which ones that are most important to focus on in the given moment.